the wrong thing to suggest.
Thank you.
Forgive me, I'm trying to sort of gouge the theory of the meeting. Presumably, we have progressive Americans, Jews, trying to figure out what to say, what to think, how to stand vis-a-vis issues going on in Israel. So I'm going to make just a few very simple points. The problem, it seems to me, for Democrats in Israel, and by the way, there is no such thing as being for Israel. There's only being for some Israelis over other Israelis. Israelis have a country. We're not now back in 1946 trying to figure out whether the Grady-Morrison plan is a good one, or whether we should, adopt partition. The state is in existence, and it has a politics. So the question is, what do people in this room do to support those people in Israel who actually subscribe to democratic norms? The problem for Israelis who subscribe to democratic norms are not the settlements. They're the settlers. That is to say, the 40% of the population, many of whom are not across the Green Line, but who certainly support the settlement project, for whom legitimacy is not legitimacy as Democrats normally understand. Legitimacy is the consent of the governed. For whom legitimacy is rooted in fundamentalist religious ideas, who live in a state that they would gladly turn theocratic if they had to choose between theocracy and democratic life, who think that Rabin's assassin should be freed. 30% of Israelis think Rabin's assassin should be freed. I mean, I can give you lots of other data along those lines. So you have a very significant part of the Israeli population committed to norms that are not democratic norms. The settlements are only one aspect of what they believe. They also believe in no separation between religion and state. Now, this sounds very sort of abstract, but the fact is, you have school systems in the country that are as backward and are as totalistic, if not totalitarian, in what they teach as, schools in rural Quebec in 1932. Since only one other Canadian is here, you probably don't completely understand the illusion at this point, but I'm from Quebec, so I want you to understand that it's quite possible to have the patina of a democracy and actually have something quite other than a democracy. Israel is a very flawed democracy. It holds elections. It has no constitution. Its Bill of Rights, which is the so-called law of human dignity, hangs by a thread. In order for it to have any traction, you need to have judges who are constantly electing in some kind of self-selecting process, who are prepared to enforce the law of human dignity, and that is very much now on the block, because the Likud governments are trying to put in people like Jeff Sessions in our world. The free press is free only to an extent. I mean, you can say anything. You can be as impudent as you want, and Israeli journalists are not great on fact-checking. But the Israeli press is actually largely controlled by the government. The most important radio station that everybody listens to, more or less like Fox News, except for one or two anomalies, Neubach, okay, Karen Neubach in the morning, that's like what we have left. And, you also have land policies that are highly discriminatory, where the vast majority of the lands in the country are state-run. I could go on and on. We have a very flawed democracy here. And when people talk to me about religious pluralism, that American Jews should be thinking about religious pluralism, I start to get a little nuts, particularly when it boils down to the women of the wall should be able to pray and carry a Torah to the Wailing Wall. And I think, what does that have to do with religious pluralism? I mean, no one in any state apparatus should have anything to say about the religious imaginations of anybody, if you believe in democratic norms. You don't make Israel more religiously pluralistic by giving Reform rabbis the right to exercise theocratic privilege. So, simple message back to American Jews who want to help Israelis who have an abiding belief in democratic norms, which, by the way, maybe they got a little bit from Bava Metzia, and maybe got a little bit from, some prophetic vision, but mostly they got from Kant and John Stuart Mill. Democratic norms in Israel to be defended. If you want to defend them, stand for democratic norms the same way you would here. You don't have to apologize as American Jews, for whom democratic norms are so precious and necessary. You don't have to apologize for saying, something, I stand for it here, and I stand for it everywhere, including Israel. And that means separation of religion and state. And by the way, going back to Quebec, it took 2 generations, but the religious confessional school systems of Quebec were overturned. You need some patience here. In the 1990s, we finally got a secular school system in Quebec. It can happen in Israel too over a long period of time. Or not. But what American Jews should be saying back to Israelis is, we support Israelis who support democratic norms because that's our lifeblood here. It's not a rivalry about who's a better Jew. You don't have to worry about whether or not you're custodians of the true Judaism. I don't trust you to tell me what a Jew is any more than I trust Naftali Bennett. Religious imagination is very idiosyncratic, very precious, very individual, and that's its grandeur. The state should have nothing to say about it. And that's why you have a right to bring those values by which you live to the country that, happens to be this Hebrew Republic for which you have particular sentiments. So.